The average Japanese worker does not make as much in buying power as the American worker does. And all too often, a Japanese worker will live in an apartment that has maybe 2 rooms, and he'll use his living room, kitchen, and bedroom. He'll have just one room, and maybe have a bathroom for the other room, but you should have a little flat, like a little hole in the wall that's very small, and that's where he lives and sleeps and eats his meals and whatever. Not up to the standard Americans. The Japanese CEO makes 17 times what the American CEO does. 17 times what the average worker does. But in contrast, the American CEO makes more than 80 times what the average American worker makes. In other words, the Japanese do not have the disparity between their top management and their laborers that we have. So the Japanese CEO makes a whole lot less than the American CEO, but also less in proportion to the income of the average worker. The ratio, your book says, is 17 to 1 for the Japanese and more like above 80 to 1 for the American. I mean, it's not unheard of for an American CEO to receive a $20 million bonus at Christmas time or whatever. And believe me, a lot of blue-collar workers resent it. Now, I'm going to skip over this part about women. Japanese women were traditionally taught to be a good wife and a wise mother. But in recent years, their women have just simply lost any interest, it seems, in anything that has to do with family. And their young men are wondering, what are we going to do? Because they find that their men have, the men find that women have no interest in marriage or sex, babies or child rearing or anything like that. All they're interested in is career. Now, I said that to one class, and some young Japanese goes, but all the men are interested in is pornography. And I said to her as nicely as I could, well, dying is still dying, and you people are dying. And I'm not talking about dying a natural death. I'm talking about dying out as a race, where you die without reproducing yourself. And it's still dying regardless of the excuse you use for it. Anyway, Japan has the highest percentage of people over 65 of any country on earth. Highest over 65. Now, folk, in the land of Japan, a year or 2 ago, it made world news, it made a little wave. In Japan, they sell more diapers now for older people than are sold for babies. As their population ages and they're not reproducing, it appears that if they don't change their ways fast, they're going to die out as a race. Now, what got it started? Okay, I'll start with World War II. I talk about between World War I and World War II, Japan had a big population explosion. Then, as is the case of all wars, when the war ends and the troops come home, they start having lots of babies. This happened after World War I. My dad was a war baby, because his dad fought in World War I. World War II, I was a war baby for World War II, along with us, millions of us who are called baby boomers, who are now reaching retirement age. But in the case of Japan, they had a big population boom after the war, but they ended it rather quickly. There was a fever going around the world saying that the world has too many people, we must curb our population. The problem was other countries in the world had religious reasons not to. Some religions believe that birth control is wrong, or some religions believe that children should support their parents. Therefore, the more children you have, the more support you're going to have when you get older. But in the land of Japan, the Japanese were listened to every time we talk about birth control because they had no compunction against any form of birth control, including, not only did they practice birth control, they practiced abortion, and they practiced infanticide. If they didn't want to go through abortion and kill the baby after it's born, again, no law against it. Any parent could do anything with a child they wanted to. Nobody would say anything about it. So they were listened to, but they did their birth control altogether too well. and their young girls grow up having hardly seen a baby. They have no other babies, no brothers and sisters. A lot of times they're only children, and they don't have any cousins either, hardly, who are babies. So they know nothing about babies. They don't care. They grow up being pushed. You must excel in school. You must excel in school. You must get a career. You must get a career. You must be like your mother who stayed at home and tended to children. You must get a career. And they learn this lesson so well that the fact is they are dying as a race. And unless they change your ways fast, they're going to simply... And the one difference between them and us too is they will not allow foreigners in to live long. They frown on foreigners. Now they have allowed Americans to come in and work as maybe English teachers, because English is becoming a universal language, but they don't want foreigners to stay. So with that in mind, their islands are slowly, gradually aging, depopulating. Your book calls it a graying population. And now, the few children do have, the pressure on these children to excel in school is intense. And the parents work really hard to try to get their children to excel and get into the best colleges. All right. The problem is, though, when the kid doesn't excel, he feels like he's utterly worthless and a failure. Now, this, folk, I want to emphasize, is not necessarily true in our society. Some of you may have heard that Elvis Presley was told by a recording artist one time, "You'll never make it in the music world, you're no good as a musician, just go back to truck driving." And Elvis got in his car and cried all the way home. Any of you have heard any stories like this? Elvis Presley. Well, a few weeks later, some recording artist gave him a chance, recorded a record, and sold 1 million copies, and the rest, they say, is history. Elvis's voice has sold more recordings than anybody's in history. Many a ball player has been told, you don't have a chance, you're not going to make it, you can't cut it. And went on, these ball players gone on to become superstars. But in the land of Japan, if you fail in academic pursuits, you're considered washed up. As a result, Japan has a very high rate of suicides among its young people. And oftentimes, it makes world news, the young people get together on the internet and decide, now, you commit suicide over here, and I'll commit it over there, and this buddy of ours, he'll commit suicide. And they get together in a certain place, and they all commit mass suicide in different parts of the islands, just to make a point to elders. They have a very high suicide rate. And part of this may be due to the fact that their religion, the Japanese are the least, and I say this without meaning any detriment, but they're the least religious people on the face of the earth, less devoted to religion. But to fill the spiritual void, a lot of Japanese will embrace Now, I had some students, what is this kind of cult? I really don't know, except that it is extremely spiritual, much more so than Shintoism, which is our standard religion. Soka Gaki, or Soka Gaki, I believe is the way it's pronounced, as best as I can tell. It's the Buddhist organization that has gotten millions of followers, so much so it's actually formed its own political party. Essentially, it's their way of reacting against the seemingly lack of any spirituality in their personal lives. Shintoism no longer respects the emperor as being divine. That's one thing that the previous emperor had to get rid of. All right. By the way, what I'm telling you about Japan, have any of you heard it outside, or you haven't? Okay. Yesterday, one student said she'd taken a course in it, and the professor had said a lot of the same stuff that I'm saying. And most of it is in the book. Something else I want to say about Japan, too. to get the high achievement. I mean, their students are the highest achievers academically in the world, but what they don't tell you is to get this high achievement, they often resort to paddlings or corporal punishment. The corporal punishments can be severe, and on occasion it has actually resulted in the death of some of their youngsters. You might ask, don't the parents sue? In Japan, parents do not sue teachers. Now, there was a case one time in Japan where a baseball player got socked by his manager, and he sued the manager, took the case to court, and the judge ruled that the player had conducted himself in such a way as to provoke the manager to sock him. Therefore, the player was at fault for being socked. Now, folks, that could hardly happen in American court. But essentially, their court system is rigged to where it always takes the side of the person who ranks higher at the expense of the person who ranks lower. So if any parent tries to sue a teacher, the teacher is always right, the parent is always wrong. And homeschooling is highly frowned on. Japanese children wear uniforms, and again, this has been proven. Even in the United States, when students wear uniforms, their academic output is higher, behavior is better. Now, this does not apply to college, but it does apply to grades K through 12. Uniforms seem to have a calming effect on students. Again, if you want to dispute it, argue with the experts. It seems to me, from my observation, that as our dress codes have gone downhill in our own country on grades K through 12, academic achievement has gone down actually disproportionately. If you don't like what I'm saying, this book shows a picture on page 917 of some Japanese school children in their uniforms. Very exact, and they must meet exacting behavior standards, and they do a lot of homework. The length of a Japanese school year is 240 days, which basically means that is 60 days more than ours. Our school year is 180 days. Add 60 days, what this means is that between grades they get about 2 weeks off for what might be a summer vacation, just a short time, and then they go back to the next grade. They take a summer off, not in Japan. They go to school year-round with just a few small breaks in between. So they have a very high literacy rate. All right. Anyone else have any comments about Japan? It's a country that in some ways has achieved highly, in other ways it has problems. Now, your little tigers, these are the smaller countries of Southeast Asia. That includes places like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Little tigers. Korea, again, Korea is divided, has been for about 3 generations now, and will be for some time, probably. No chance, seemingly no chance of it ending. South Korea is prosperous, North Korea is starving. North Korea occasionally rattles its sabers and shoots across the border at South Korea. The South Koreans so far have seemingly been patient and just taken it. Taiwan. When Mao Zedong took over China, Taiwan was the Chinese people fled to Taiwan. So Taiwan consists of half its population is Chinese and half native Taiwanese. But after a time, it seems like there's been a lot of intermingling to where that there's not that much difference anymore. Now, Taiwan is one of the world's trouble spots. China claims that it owns it, and if China ever stepped across the sea to claim Taiwan, folk, we have no idea what the United States might do, if anything. Who would step in, who'd prevent it? What might happen is it might trigger a world war, or it might just mean that the rest of the world would say to Taiwan, just surrender, we're not going to help you. Again, we don't know.